Hi, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The Satsang with Shambhavi podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jaya Kula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are.
Would you talk about how we want to let go of certain things and we just can't, and then we go along and keep doing our practice, and then all of a sudden things fall away? Mm-hmm. And it's like we can't consciously let things go, but we do let things go at the right point. It seems like there's a ripeness to that.
Well, the number one thing to understand about that is that our lack of sovereignty over when karmas unwind is a great humility inducer. Especially here in the United States, we think we can plan for everything. And if we just have the right plan, things are going to work out. We can plan to get rid of this and that karma. We can plan to have certain kinds of experiences in our spiritual life. If I just do these practices, then this will happen, and I'm going to plan for that. I've even had, as some of you know, people come to me and ask for Diksha and say things like, well, I've been around for a couple years and I've done this and that, so I think now it's just, the right time for me to be initiated, like as if it was part of their career plan or something. So when we get more deeply into our spiritual life, we just realize that we are just one small factor in an infinite mandala of factors. The way that our karmas do not listen to us is a great inducer of humility and patience, and ultimately friendliness towards ourselves. We beat up on ourselves because we have the erroneous conception, the erroneous conviction that there's way more under our control than there actually is. We recognize eventually, after doing a lot of practice, that we are in a partnership with wisdom, and that wisdom is actually in the driver's seat, and things will happen when they happen. We put in our effort, and as Ma says, we continue to do our sadhana every day because you just never know when something's going to change. You just never know. There is one factor, though, aside from doing sadhana every day, there's one other factor which is a part of ripeness, and that's actual sincerity. So we get to a place where we are really asking in this special way, where all doubts have disappeared, all resistance has disappeared to our letting go of something or yielding that thing back to God. And that's a pretty unusual circumstance. I found that attachments are pretty wily, and we may even be going, oh, I really want this to go away. But 47% of us still doesn't actually want it to go away because we feel comfortable with it. It's what we know, and we don't really know what's on the other side of it. How many times have you, those of you that have been around for a while, you try to imagine yourself without certain habit patterns that you have, and you can barely imagine who you would be. You're so identified with those things that you don't know that you'd be anybody if you didn't have your attachment to those things. So even when we're going through our most sincere-looking histrionics, sometimes we aren't actually really ready to yield. And I think that the pure moments of willingness, of really that desire being one-pointed for something to be unwound, can really be a powerful part of ripeness. And sometimes we might not even be aware of that. And sometimes things are a gift. So I found at various points in my life as a practitioner that you get gifts for showing up, basically for showing up in your practice. And there's forms of wisdom wandering around that appreciate that. Forms of wisdom who appreciate when they encounter someone who's a sincere practitioner, and they will sometimes just give you a gift. Unexpected, not necessarily related to unwinding your karmas, but something. But I think the main lesson is we aren't really in control, and we can't make a plan for it, and that ripeness is made up of infinite factors. So we just have to be modest, and as I like to say, put our head down and keep walking barefoot on the road. That's a really exciting message. It's made me a lot of money.
Thinking a lot since yesterday about the teaching of Ma's that you read to us, where she talks about getting past the uncertainty, certainty dichotomy to a place where you understand that everything is that. I want your help in understanding.
It's not really understanding. That's the problem. There's not really anything to understand. If you're still like, I don't understand how to move beyond certainty and uncertainty and what is beyond that, and I want to understand what's beyond that, that's a horizontal move. And you're still in the realm of trying to understand things with your ordinary mind. The way to move beyond certainty and uncertainty is to contact wisdom directly, listen to it and follow it. And then you may still feel uncertain because we are not enlightened. You know, another part of this is that you personally are probably not going to move beyond uncertainty. And myself, in certain areas of my life, aka the big H, housing, my most karmically impacted area, at least according to my astrology chart, but it's certainly an area that I've had problems with and feel confusion about. The way for me to move beyond certainty and uncertainty is to do divination or to try to consult wisdom in some direct way. But even so, I still feel uncertain. So don't think that consulting wisdom in our condition as not totally enlightened means that you're going to now not feel uncertain about things. If only that were true. I mean, there's some areas in my life that I do feel it's not a question of certain or uncertain, and I don't feel confused or anxious about those areas. But I still have at least this one area that I feel there's still clouds in the sky. I would say the way to do it is to consult wisdom directly. That is beyond any other consideration. And it's also beyond our ordinary understanding. It's more of a feeling of knowledge or a feeling of wisdom that arises when we do that. I experience that as a kind of very recognizable kind of relaxation when I am following that. It doesn't mean I can't still get into worrying about something, but there's also, when I'm following that and I feel I have done that properly, then I know I've done the best possible. That's a very ordinary thought. I've done the best possible I can do. But there's also that feeling, there's something in the air that feels like I'm on the right path. I'm threading that needle or walking that razor's edge in the right way. And then whatever happens, happens. Beyond certainty and uncertainty is the immediacy of simply working with what is arising and not expecting to feel certain or uncertain about it, but just doing the best with the gates of your perceptions to work with that in a more spontaneous way. Just though in my life, the ways to move, aside from just my own feeling of, I would say I have a feeling of rightness about things. It's not personal certainty or uncertainty. It's more of just the flavor of a mandala. I'm moving through that and it has a feeling of goodness and rightness and something that's indefinable and indescribable. But then I get to those parts of the mandala that are still impacted or cloudy or entangled in some way. And I have to use other means to try to access that wisdom and follow that. And when we're doing that, whatever happens is fine. But don't expect to feel cleared of uncertainty or anxiety. That just comes when it comes. And for instance, myself, I've been practicing now for more than 35 years, and certain things have cleared up and become less about ordinary mind, and other things haven't. And it just takes the time that it takes. That's a friendly attitude to have toward oneself. It takes the time that it takes, expresses confidence in life and wisdom.
I was thinking today about the thing there is for us to do is just practice and realize and survive, which made me think about my responsibility to other people. Being of service versus being egoic, I guess.
Yeah. So we all know that people can practice a lot and remain very egoic. That happens. But eventually that goes away too. So as long as you're asking this question and you're vigilant with yourself, understand that the desire to be helpful just naturally pours out. It's not anything we decide on or cultivate or, am I going to be helpful now and not then? The more awake state is just you always feel a desire to be helpful in whatever way. It could be very, very small or not. One could spend one's life in just small acts of kindness toward people, and it would be wonderful. It's going to come in whatever form it comes, and it's going to come naturally when it comes. My conviction is that people who practice and have open-hearted tenderness feeling toward other people and other beings, even if they do nothing but sit at home, are still going to be helpful. It's just whatever their natural expression is, that is going to be helpful. And this is also the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita. It's Krishna's teaching, and I think it's absolutely true. So we don't have to worry about what form it's going to take. It doesn't have to look like any particular thing. What our job is as practitioners is to be vigilant with ourselves, to be our own fierce teachers, and to let fierce teachers do their thing so we don't end up like some of those other people. You've seen plenty of examples of people who have used their spiritual life as a form of self-aggrandizement. You know that because you've seen that demonstrated amply in the public sphere. Maybe it would be helpful to you to just ask yourself now and then if that's what you really want to look like, if that's what you really want your life to be like. Having an authentic spiritual life that doesn't veer off into some weird, disturbing detour requires incredible vigilance, sobriety, honesty. It requires that you allow reality, whether it's in the form of your own insight or your teacher or circumstances, that you allow reality to demolish your self-concepts and self-protectiveness. That is required. This is a demolition project. You can go very slowly, or you can go more quickly, or you can avoid it for some time, or you can do whatever you like. But ultimately, this boils down to this is a destructive process where those free-flowing wisdom virtues of compassion and kindness and tenderness and mercy and your ability to be creative and self-expressive are being liberated from a prison of limitation. You already have all those things in full measure. There's nothing to build, there's nothing to enhance, and there's nothing to fix because you already are that in full measure. You already are that wisdom completely in full measure. The only thing that is happening is letting limitation fall away or be torn away or dissolve or whatever it does in any particular moment. Really, if you want to have a spiritual life that is not tainted by self-aggrandizement, then you have to allow that process to happen. Again, it can happen slowly, but that is the job. Right? That is the path. This is why people get into these weird detours. They don't let reality destroy their self-concepts. They have a lot of energy and they're absolutely determined not to be humiliated. And they just never lie down, no matter how many times they're punched. We should take that as an object lesson of what not to do, because you're basically denying grace. You're basically saying no to grace. Those kind of big upsets that Titans go through are really grace in action. When their spiritual communities fall apart, or their careers fall apart, or their spouses leave them, or they have big failures and whatever, those are big moments of grace for us in the Titan realm. And yet we often just scramble to pick up the pieces again and use our strength to do that instead of to just lie down, stop, and see what needs to be relaxed in there. Take a different path.
I had a moment today where I was sitting there and I was grieving, I was crying, and I was feeling very sad. And I stopped myself and I said, wait a second, am I grieving or am I hungry ghosting? Like, am I driven by some kind of compulsion of longing or sadness or grief, or is this the real thing?
Well, compulsion is authentic. It's just authentic compulsion. It's not inauthentic. In fact, maybe it's the most authentic thing about some people. But in any case, grief doesn't really have a narrative. It really is this very clean kind of water thing. It feels healthy and good to just feel grief in a sense. I mean, it's hard to describe. It's hard to put into words, but that sort of feeling the human condition and feeling our helplessness in the face of impermanence and the inevitable losses that every life incurs. And there's just something about weeping and feeling grief that includes not only ourselves, but also other people, and feeling like we're all in that same family of loss and impermanence. And that just feels clean and healthy and tender and doesn't really have a story, or not much of a story anyway. So that might be one way you can, if there's a big story to something, then it usually has more to do with realm vision. But it's still real. We can't dismiss it as inauthentic, unfortunately.
I'm curious if you have any advice about reminding oneself about the devotional seed of discipline, like before daily practice. It's so possible for me to be like such a taskmaster and be like, sit down, do your work.
Well, occasionally we have to do that because we feel a lot of resistance for a while or something. So it's not like we never have to do that. One thing you can do is make your practice space a living symbol of that curiosity and devotion. Aesthetically speaking, I mean, like what objects are there? What colors are there? How is the lighting there? Make it a place that magnetizes you and in and of itself reminds you of the beauty that you're seeking and the devotion that you feel and the curiosity that you feel. That would be the number one piece of advice I would have. There's something integral to reality itself that is related to art and aesthetics. So noticing, even when you first get up and do dinacharya, feeling the dance-like quality of the movements of your body as you're doing that, noticing the texture of your skin when you're doing the prana, smoothing, really like opening your senses right away and to an appreciation of the qualities of things. That will remind you also.
Could you talk a little bit about the relationship between enacting the discipline and the spontaneity?
Well, spontaneity paradoxically comes from the discipline. The discipline comes from devotion. The discipline comes from desire. The discipline doesn't come from the idea that you should be disciplined. No matter how much desire you have and how much devotion you experience, there are days when you need to just power through. But you can't power through months and months and years of practice. The underlying motivation has to be desire. It has to be excitement about discovering what life is like with all of your crap. It has to be a sense of adventure and curiosity about what is this world really all about. There has to be that desire to find out. As Ma said, you find out. That was one of her famous phrases when she would give teachings, and she would say, now you find out. So you have to want to find out. You can't just think it's a good thing to want to find out. You have to actually want to. That's what actually keeps us motivated over a lifetime. And we can be inspired by our teachers and various things that we learn, but ultimately it really all boils down to what we want. And that gives rise to natural discipline, the discipline that is driven by what we want. And then it's not dry, it's not dry discipline. And then spontaneity comes because the discipline destroys contrivance. The discipline of sadhana, the discipline of working with a teacher, the discipline of seva or whatever else you're doing, over years and years and years begins to destroy your concepts, your limitations, your contrivance. And then naturalness just appears. Uncontrived naturalness and spontaneity just appears out of that. So again, remember that the discipline isn't holding anything back or building anything. We're not doing it for the sake of being disciplined. It's happening because that's the way to erode those patterns of limitation, aka karma. The discipline itself is serving that destructive process. And then, of course, it's opening the gates of our perception slowly, day by day. So then, alongside the destruction of those concepts is the getting of knowledge, more knowledge of the self, and being able to enter more into natural devotion. Those all happen simultaneously. And so then we have more desire to discover more when we understand more what our real natural capacity is. Satsang with Shambhavi is produced by Jaya Kula, a nonprofit community offering opportunities to learn and practice in the direct realization traditions of Trika Shaivism and Dzogchen. If you enjoyed listening, please help us keep this podcast and many other teachings open to all by making a monthly or one-time donation. Visit jayakula.org to make a donation and explore more of our offerings.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.